CBC Marketplace recently released an investigation into financial advice being given by Canada's major banks, which revealed that much of the advice being given at banks isn't really in the best interest of customers, it's just meant to direct people into high-priced financial products that make the bank more money. This issue has been a thorn in my side for years and is something I've repeatedly tried to explain to friends. Listen up, you know who you are, pay attention. In general, the people you meet with at the bank are not financial planners being paid to make sure your investments grow as much as possible. They're just salespeople who work for the bank and are trying to get as much of your money for themselves as they can. If there's one fact that makes this incredibly obvious, it's that financial advisor is a regulated term in Canada and indicates that the person you're talking to has an actual fiduciary duty to their clients. However, the people who work at banks are generally financial advisors, spelled with an O, who are just salespeople with no responsibility to act in the customer's best interest. Like most sales reps, they earn bonuses and career advancement through selling more products, not by providing the best advice for a given customer. This leads to a lot of people being directed into high-priced, actively managed mutual funds through the bank, and Canada's mutual funds have some of the highest fees in the world. The unfortunate thing is, this is nothing new. In fact, back in 2014, CBC did exactly the same investigation with the same reporter looking into this issue and finding many of the same problems. In the intervening years, despite the government taking some action on the behavior of banks and introducing a variety of consumer protection measures into the Bank Act, it looks like things have gotten worse, not better. So, what's going on? To learn more, I reached out to Duff Conacher, co-founder of Democracy Watch, who is an advocate for accountability in government and finance. We discussed what's going wrong at banks, what the government has done to address it, why they've failed, and what could be done to correct it. Without further ado, let's get into the interview. Okay, so to start off, if someone is looking to invest their money or to open some sort of financial product at a bank, and they're going to talk to a bank advisor about it, what's the most important thing for them to understand going into the process?
That it's very, very unlikely that that advisor has any expertise to give them good advice, that that advisor is paid to sell only the bank's products and actually to upsell them. So try to get them to buy things that will make the banks the most money and cost you as the consumer the most money. The banks want to take your money, and it's possible you'll end up with someone at a bank who is a certified financial planner who actually gives you good advice, but highly, highly unlikely. You're going to end up with someone trying to sell the bank's products who likely has no expertise in anything, not even the bank's products, just in selling.
So tell me a bit about the bank accountability campaign that Democracy Watch is doing.
We are trying to get bank accountability measures in place, have the finance minister, Chrystia Freeland, and the Liberal Party and all the federal parties work together to get these measures in place that have been implemented in the US, in the UK, and Australia, and would essentially ensure that everyone would be served fairly and well at fair prices and interest rates. And we're far away from that. And hopefully, Chrystia Freeland will live up to her own words, which is that businesses always want to make as much money as they can and do things that are in their interest, and the government has to step in and set the right rules and set policing to ensure that businesses serve people fairly and well at fair prices.
Yeah, and on that note, before the interview, we talked a bit about the promises that the Liberals made in 2021 to reform the financial sector. They promised a lot, but barely anything has been done. What do you think are some of the key areas where they've failed to live up to their promises?
One of the key areas is to empower the Financial Consumer Agency of Canada and mandate them, because they have some powers and they've been a total lapdog in the last 20 years, rolling over every time and letting the banks off the hook for clear wrongdoing. So the Financial Consumer Agency of Canada needs to be mandated to do regular audits of all fees and interest rates of the banks, and to order them lowered if they amount to gouging. And the Liberals promised to give the FCAC that power in 2021 election and have broken that promise so far.
So coming back to the piece by the CBC, what they showed in the marketplace investigation was really nothing new, right? They actually did the exact same investigation 10 years ago, right down to having the same reporter hosting the segment. But it seemed to me that the advice being given out this time was a lot more aggressive and egregious than last time. Do you get that impression too? And do you think, something has changed, or have they just been emboldened by a lack of consequences over the past decade?
Yeah, just a small clarification. They did it 7 years ago, not 10 years ago. And one of the things, again, about the Financial Consumer Agency of Canada, it's the regulator for financial consumers. It should be doing these regular, unannounced mystery shopper audits and inspections to catch wrongdoing. But instead, the CBC, as our national public broadcaster, has done more of those audits than the regulator has in the last 7 years, which just shows you how much of a lapdog the Financial Consumer Agency of Canada is. In terms of what the CBC found this time, last time they really only checked about opening accounts and things like that. This time they also had people ask questions about investments. And that's where you saw a lot of aggressive upselling, because people who have money, the banks want to take it away and give it to themselves. They're not, they're tellers, they're so-called advisors who really aren't qualified to give advice, are all there just to sell products and get as much money into the bank's accounts, and they don't really care whether it's growing your money or really fits with any kind of reasonable and rational financial plan for your financial future. So that's by asking those questions about investments, the CBC revealed how much more pressure that is put on people who have money that the banks want.
Okay, and I'll have to go back and check my notes here, but there was also an investigation in 2014, so they may have done this story even more times than I realized.
Yes, and the Financial Consumer Agency of Canada did one mystery shopping, the first one back in 2003 when it started, tested the banks on a bunch of basic consumer things like opening accounts, cashing checks, found 80 to 90% non-compliance, didn't prosecute any of the banks, told them that's our baseline study. We'll test you again, and next time zero tolerance. Tested again in 2005, and they left off the questions that they had found the 80 to 90% non-compliance back in 2003. This was the commissioner at the time was Bill Knight, just rolled over like a total lapdog and let the banks off the hook. And then the FCAC did their next mystery shopper audit in 13 years later, in 2018. And that's it. In 20 years, they actually just are not doing law enforcement 101. To enforce any law, you have to do regular unannounced inspections. And secondly, when you find violations, you have to do a penalty that will discourage violations in the future, which means taking away all the profit that the banks have made from violating the law. And the FCAC has never done that. They're way behind the US Financial Consumer Protection Bureau and the UK, both of which have implemented tens of billions of dollars in fines in the last 10 years since they were created. And in the last 20 years, the FCAC has only imposed $16 million in fines. So they're literally tens of billions of dollars below the level of penalties that have been implemented and imposed in the US and in the UK. They're a total lapdog.
Yeah, I mean, I guess if the penalties don't rise to the point of making this activity unprofitable, it becomes just the cost of doing business.
That's right. And before 2018, the FCAC didn't even have the power to name a bank unless they prosecuted the bank, and they never prosecuted. They've actually never prosecuted one of the big banks for anything. Since 2018, they've had the power to name them, but before that, they didn't. So they might impose a fine, but they wouldn't even name the institution that had violated the law. So consumers wouldn't have any idea as to which institutions had the worst record and which ones to avoid as a result. So finance minister after finance minister after finance minister, starting with Paul Martin, then Jim Flaherty, then Bill Morneau, and now Chrystia Freeland, have all rolled over and let the big bank executives get away with gouging and abusing 25 million Canadians. And it's really weird because these people are part of parties that want to get elected. And 25 million voters are out there who are bank customers who are being regularly gouged and abused. So you'd think you'd do something for them if you wanted to get elected, because some of them would likely support you if you actually protected them. And there's a lot of them. There's 25 million votes out there that a party could have. But we have not seen any parties take this seriously across the board. Even the NDP, which you would think would be pushing for real bank accountability. It's a real puzzle. I don't understand why. You'd have to ask them why you would not protect 25 million bank customers and why you would instead protect big bank executives and their average $12 million in annual salary and $2 billion in bonuses that they hand out to the top people at the banks, and protect them from accountability instead of protecting 25 million voters from being gouged and abused.
So the response from the banks has been the usual statement of, these conversations are unacceptable. We have training on ethical customer service, etc. But it seems to me that these scenarios are playing out at all of the major banks and are really more the norm than the exception to the rule. I mean, do you put any stock in what the banks have been saying in these statements and their supposed training programs?
No, the CBC's report is based on internal bank employees blowing the whistle, and CBC is protecting their identities, but obviously have verified that they actually work at the banks. And one of the people that the CBC interviewed was a bank employee who had left the bank, but actually recorded some of the messages and at meetings that their manager had told them all, and it was all about upselling, sell, 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 get the customer to buy things they don't need, but that will make us money. So the Canadian Bank Association can say whatever they want, but it's just a false claim. This is rampant. It's happening across the banks. It was shown in 2017. The regulator, the Financial Consumer Agency of Canada, did nothing to stop it. And the measures that were put in place in the law to prohibit pressuring employees to upsell and to prohibit taking advantage of customers have therefore not been enforced at all. And so why would the banks stop doing it? And CBC 7 years later has done another mystery shopper audit and found the same pattern of abuses and upselling and taking advantage of customers and giving them illegal advice. And the regulator is probably still not going to do anything because they're just a dedicated lapdog. The only way this will stop is if they are required in every case when there's a complaint to issue a public ruling and impose the fine that would take away all the profit that the bank had made. And we'll see whether Chrystia Freeland actually cares about 25 million voters and whether the Liberals do, or whether she, like past finance ministers, is going to roll over and let them get away with the abuse and the gouging. And another key thing is in 2018, bank employees were given whistleblower protection as the right to blow the whistle, but they have to blow the whistle internally in the bank. And that's just crazy. They're not going to stick their neck out and blow the whistle on illegal activity within the bank. They'll lose the job the next day, and they have no recourse if that happens. And so the whistleblower protection system has to be changed to be best practice with a dedicated office there that bank employees can call. And this should apply actually to all big businesses. There should be a dedicated office where you can call and find out and get support, including free legal advice on how to blow the whistle on your business if they're violating the law. And that's another key part of enforcement, especially given the regulator is not doing enforcement at all. You have to empower bank employees to be enforcing these rules since the regulator is a dedicated lapdog.
Now, some of the stuff in that CBC Marketplace report was, I think, a lot worse than would be obvious to a casual viewer. For example, advisors saying that mutual fund fees were only applied on returns and not on the total amount invested. So really, the fees are going to be more than 10 times what the advisors implied in those meetings. Do you think
Yes.
that's like a deliberate misrepresentation, or do you think the frontline salespeople at the bank generally don't understand the products that they're selling?
I don't think they understand the products that they're selling. They're not required to be certified financial planners. Even if they were, they're under a lot of pressure just to sell the bank's product. And that includes, as some of the evidence that was relayed by the employees CBC interviewed, includes misleading the customers or just leaving out information. One of them said, I'm not sure a bunch of times in what was recorded by the CBC's mystery shopper. So that, they're just leaving it vague. Oh, I'm not sure whether they charge you on the whole amount or just part of it. Again, these people are not on your side. They're trying to get your money, get as much of it as they can, and they do not have the expertise nor any incentive to actually help you grow and plan your financial future. And even if you're dealing with a certified financial planner, just to deal with the whole industry, there's a lot of serious questions and key questions you should be asking any planner before you ask them for advice. You have to pay to get good advice generally, unless you happen to have a relative or a friend who really knows what they're doing. But even them, you should be asking, do you have any incentive? Do you receive any benefit, any compensation, any kind of advantage of any kind by advising me to invest or put my money in one product over another? And if they refuse to answer that question, walk away, because it means they likely are getting secret commissions, which are illegal. And if they're not going to tell you about them, you don't want to deal with them because you're not going to grow your money as best as you can with someone who's actually independent and does not have any ties or benefits or incentives to push you towards certain investments.
Yeah, another specific claim that was made in one of these meetings was an advisor at CIBC saying that returns on a mutual fund would absolutely be greater than 10% on average. Now, obviously, they're not allowed to guarantee returns in the first place, but I've also pretty much never seen a bank mutual fund that returns 10% net of the fees over the long term, especially for the retail investor class. Like, do they even have to show people the actual historical returns of these funds in the meetings, or is it just kind of up in the air as to how they sell it?
It's up in the air. They're not acting as financial advisors in terms of any kind of regulated area where there are clear prohibitions under the regulations for financial advisors. This is a longstanding problem. Difference between advisor spelled OR or advisor spelled ER at the end of the word advisor. And so they're bank employees and they're only trained to sell. The Bank Act says they can't take advantage of customers and that they have to give them advice that fits with the context of their overall financial future. So that is a prohibition against them making those kind of claims. But they're not covered by the regular securities laws and issues regulations that are still too weak, but that at least have put in some place, in some part, some regulations that cover financial advisors. And so again, they're not on your side. They're just trying to sell you as much as you can with the fees that come along with it for the bank. And they very, very, very unlikely that they have any expertise that would be able to give you any good advice to plan your financial future. You saw that with one of the mystery shoppers from the CBC saying, I've inherited $50,000. What should I do with it? I've got a $17,000 credit card debt. And a couple of the people told them, oh, just pay off part of that debt. Well, this is one of the biggest areas of bank gouging, that if you have $1,000 in credit card debt and you pay off only $999, the bank will charge you full interest on that full $1,000 until you pay off that last dollar. So it's just crazy, crazy bad advice to say only pay off part of your credit card interest debt, because that's very likely to be your highest interest debt. Again, because the finance ministers have allowed the banks to gouge in the area of credit cards. So if you only paid off part of it, you're still going to be charged interest on the full 17,000 until you pay off the entire amount. So that was just crazy bad advice and just an example of how bad the banks are doing in terms of the branches and the people they have are not there for customer service. It's for customer gouging and abuse and to take your money.
Yeah, I particularly enjoyed the advisor that said, invest the full 50,000 in our mutual funds, and then to pay off your credit card debt, open a line of credit with us. It's a very
Right.
creative way to get them to take out another debt product.
Exactly. Just compounding the debt. It's just crazy.
Yeah. Now, this is something you touched on already, but I wanted to get to the Bank Act and particularly the Fair and Equitable Dealing section, which contains a lot of consumer protection provisions, which was introduced back in 2018. You've already mentioned that we could be doing better enforcement with mystery shoppers, more fines. But reading through this section, I noticed there's a lot of fairly vague language, saying that products have to be appropriate for the customer, or they can't provide false or misleading information. They can't place undue pressure on people to buy products or services. But there's a lot of gray area there and no firm definitions. So do you think we would benefit from more specific language in the legislation, or is this maybe just a matter of having a regulatory body with some actual teeth to set the expectations for behavior?
Yeah, you need a watchdog. The watchdog would then define those terms. That would be the first thing that they should have done, and issued public statements saying this is what we consider to be undue pressure, misleading, taking advantage of, and then hold the line very strictly and strongly. But instead, you have this entity. It's not independent from the finance minister. It's part of the finance department, the Financial Consumer Agency of Canada. So it's just an arm of the politician, the Minister of Finance. And as I've mentioned, since it was created in 2003, no Minister of Finance has either chosen people who are serious watchdogs to head it up or mandated it to actually do its job. In fact, as I mentioned, before 2018, the FCAC couldn't even name a bank that had violated the law unless they prosecuted, and they never prosecuted. So it's a dedicated lapdog. It's there to be a dedicated lapdog to give cover to the minister And again, the question is, Chrystia Freeland wrote in her book Plutocrats back more than a decade ago, the businesses always want to and will do whatever they can to get advantages and benefits for themselves. And the role of government is to set the right rules and effective policing to enforce those rules in order to protect customers, the environment, workers, etc. Well, we don't have the right rules. There's still gaps in them, but they are stronger than they were pre-2018. But right policing, no, we have totally ineffective policing. We have a dedicated lapdog in the Financial Consumer Agency of Canada. People may have also heard about the Ombudsman for Banking Services and Investments, where you can also file complaints. That Ombudsman cannot make binding orders. So again, why would a bank be afraid? The Ombudsman can recommend that the bank correct some problem, but can't actually require the bank to do that. So the bank can just ignore it. As well, Finance Minister Jim Flaherty and Bill Morneau, when he was Finance Minister, continued this, allowed some of the banks to leave and set up their own ombuds that they paid. And of course, they were doing that because if they choose the judge and pay the judge is going to make rulings in favor of the bank. Chrystia Freeland has required the banks by November of this year to all come back under the Ombudsman for Banking and Service and Investments, but broken the Liberals' promise to give the ombuds the power to order the banks to take corrective action when they abuse a customer and violate the law.
That's very interesting. I didn't know that about the bank.
Yeah, so you have the Financial Consumer Agency of Canada, dedicated lapdog, didn't have the powers to do the job, has had them since 2018, still not doing the job. And then the ombuds, who the banks didn't even have to belong to, now will have to by November 2024, but still does not have the power to do the job. And I also should mention, on the ombuds, the board of the ombuds are bankers. The board should be entirely independent of the banking industry. You don't have bankers sitting on overseeing the ombuds person who is then making rulings about the banks. Just crazy, and it's just been this kind of game that has been played over the last 20, 25 years, starting with Paul Martin as finance minister. And it's a sad joke. The enforcement system is a sad joke, and it's not at all a surprise as a result to see rampant violations continuing by the banks.
Yeah, and it does seem to me like this is a constant theme with a lot of Canadian regulation in a lot of areas, right? There's regulatory capture, and also the government likes to make big announcements about things like consumer protection or new regulations, but you rarely see actual follow through after the fact, doing that hard work. So you mentioned there's gaps in legislation, but do you think the gaps are really significant right now, or is it mainly a matter of needing to enforce the laws we already have on the books?
Mainly a matter of needing to enforce the laws in this area of bank consumer protection, other than the gap of there's a whistleblower protection right. So bank employees can blow the whistle if their bank's violating the law, but none of them would do that because they get fired and they'd have no recourse. So it's not really a right, and that whole system needs to be made best practice. And as you mentioned, for big businesses, this is common in terms of how government deals with them. Really, across the world, it's not just in Canada. With big businesses, they get their way. And governments play this shell game, and they've been playing it ever since the Industrial Revolution happened and these big businesses were created. And the shell game is, there's a problem, we're going to announce this new law, really strict law. But then they'll undermine enforcement or not have enforcement at all. Oh, there's another crisis, we got to do something. Oh, okay, we're going to announce big penalties. However, still enforcement will be weak, or they'll weaken the rules at the same time. So they've been playing the shell game of enforcement, penalties, and the rules. And every government's been doing it across the world in almost every big business sector to ensure that there is never effective rules without loopholes, effective enforcement, and penalties that would actually discourage violations. And that's really another whole part of our work comes into this, because secret unethical lobbying is allowed. Big money donations and fundraising is allowed, and big businesses use those techniques to stop governments and get parties in power that will protect them as opposed to protecting citizens or the environment or workers. And that's the history of the last essentially 140 years since the Industrial Revolution and big businesses were created. Really, there's very few examples of effective rules They're not loophole filled, effective enforcement and effective penalties anywhere in the world because of the power of the big business lobby. That's what we're trying to stop in every area, especially bank accountability at Democracy Watch.
Yeah. And now to wrap up, and I guess touch or build upon that discussion, I personally don't have that much faith that the government is going to be solving these problems in the short term. So, in the meantime, what do you think consumers can do to protect themselves in their personal finances?
Well, unfortunately, if you're looking for financial planning advice, you will have to pay for good advice. You're not going to get it for free from a bank. You're paying in a different way in that they're going to sell you bad products and you're going to end up paying and not making as much money as you should. And you really have to be very careful shopping around for a financial planner or advisor. There's a couple of resources about 10 key questions to ask any financial advisor or planner. And those are really aimed at ensuring they're independent and expert and can actually give you good advice. Uh, and then in terms of just basic banking services, people should check out credit unions. Credit unions, when you put money in, you're also become a shareholder. And so you have a vote for the board of directors of your credit union. And they treat you better as a result because you're not just putting the money in and having no say. You do have a say. And they have a better record of service according to all the consumer surveys that have been done over the past couple of decades. But that's really just for basic banking services. For investment services, you're going to have to pay to get some good advice, very likely, and you're still going to have to look around really closely. And one of the big questions to ask people is, if you're such a good financial planner, why are you still working? Like, if you could make money for me at a really high rate, then why would you still be working? You should have just have investments and be making a ton of money off of them. And a lot of them would have difficulty answering that question and will reveal they don't really have expertise in investing. They're just like anyone else, what they see and what they can find in their limited amount of time that sounds good is what they advise people to do. So really be careful and take your time in choosing somebody and walk away from them if you have any sign that they are not giving you the best practice service and advice.
All right, well, that was all I had for questions. So, thank you very much for taking the time. And do you want to say a few words on what people could do if they want to get informed or get involved with Democracy Watch?
Yeah, just go to democracywatch.ca and then click on campaigns. You can see our list of campaigns for democratic good government and corporate responsibility and bank accountability. I know it's discouraging when I say no finance minister has done this, despite 25 million voters wanting it. But if enough voters write letters to politicians, and you can do that with one click on our website campaign pages, then sometimes politicians are worried about getting reelected. They want to be reelected. And that's the only way, really, we can put pressure on them. And it does work sometimes. We've won changes. We've won about 50 changes, improving things over the last 20 years. But we still have these gaps of loopholes in rules, ineffective enforcement, and not high enough penalties. And those are the gaps that we really have to close to make the whole thing effective. So I hope people will join the tens of thousands that have already called for these changes and put some pressure on Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland and all the federal parties, to the Liberals and then the others, to finally make these changes when they review the banking legislation over the next year and a half.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks for your interest.